Today is October 2nd, 2022. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki Naganago Mekochi Chestokom Aki or Dekots Nagotini Siku. Hi, my name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Nitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, and north of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, and Bears Paw Nations of the Stoney, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with government signing on your behalf. As it is Pride Month, I did want to exactly mention that the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on this land by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. It's important that land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage everyone. So if you are a white settler listener, if you are a Black listener, if you are a person of color listener, and you don't identify as Indigenous, I want you to listen to that again. I encourage all to introduce themselves with their acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you don't know how to pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation or treaty, I determine how safe you are to be around my family, my community, and myself. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those that call themselves Native Calgarians, or whatever town you might be from, show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. And Jesse Winte's book Unreconciled, chapter 13, pages 180 and 181 explain it perfectly. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to as the land of the hair people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mulkinstis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name, which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ2+ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. As a Dene woman who attempted to run after joining harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow incarceration, a denial of justice, a denial of healthcare services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have work to continue. Reports to advocate for and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I cannot say have a great long weekend because the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation isn't just a long weekend for me, but very clearly for some Calgarians, it certainly was. When I know my community is still dying from the current drug policies and systems of imposed Christian-based policed drug policies with abstinence program, private healthcare and justice systems built on racism, land theft, and imposed British constructs that continue genocide of Indigenous peoples. You know, today, if you are to look into the news, you can name names of people that you are thinking about. I'm thinking of Dawn DeMont Walker and her son, Vinnie Jansen, as they try to deal with the incredible justice system that didn't protect them, but now will go after them to separate and jail them. There's so many people every day that die on Turtle Island, and every single time I turn on this mic, it's a responsibility to honor them and honor their lives. And I hope that you think of them. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping the harm as a citizen. And when we talk about truth and reconciliation, until we stop the systemic racism that Indian Residential School created, the Indian Act created, we are going to continue to perpetuate that harm. So that's why if I don't see people working on those solutions, if they don't even know what the solutions are, then I know that they are not my ally. They are not a person that considers themselves a treaty partner, and they're not committed to reconciliation. I do want to honor the Blackfoot, as the elders and members have been kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crain taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and Dene elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. I always jokingly say, and today or this last week, I did a lot of teachings that all the Northern Dene laugh at us Southerners and say, you don't put the wrong, well, I used a Mike Myers joke, actually. I said, you don't put the right emphasis on the right syllable, because he said that in a movie once and it just cracks me up. But anyway, they do say we don't emphasize the right words properly. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there as I'm trying to learn my language that was stolen from me. Any mistakes or misinterpretations about the entire podcast, not just language, is on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share my journey as I walk down the red road. I've been accused of not being kind while surviving genocide, yet I have given free book clubs, podcasts, and info on my social media for years and have so many others. And at this point, it's just willful to be ignorant on these issues. Which we can see very clearly today in the National Post. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to the previous donors for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps on whichever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for all the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. So today I'm a bit solo, so I thought I would discuss a few things that have popped up that I obviously haven't gotten a chance to really elaborate on. And I'll start a little bit about the Queen's death. I actually was asked if I would just do a whole episode on this, and I'm like, why would I, waste more breath on that person? And as it turns out, created quite a stir in my non-Indigenous side of the family that I went on national television and said that I don't mourn my oppressor. And it just shows that even in my own family, how much work there needs to be done with anti-racism work and Indigenous education. But at the end of the day, it won't happen for everybody. My hope is that the next generations will do better. I mean, Brian Jean put out a comment about, but I have Indigenous nieces and nephews. And I replied, well, that's why we have articles that talk about how to talk to your racist uncle at Thanksgiving, because that's ultimately what we have to tolerate and put up with. Now, I actually don't encourage Indigenous people to tolerate and put up with it anymore. I actually encourage you to avoid those situations, and most actually do. I'm, I guess, a lot more stubborn, and I seem to be okay with being in those situations. I'm sure the next time I see that uncle will likely be at a funeral that I won't be invited to, but will end up at. We'll see, though. Family stuff sucks, and I know I'm not alone. So if you are a mixed person, I'd love to hear about your great family stories and, building into the Thanksgiving and Christmas season. Yahoo! This ought to be fun. But yeah, it's interesting how I'll get talked about behind my back within the family, um, and not actually talked to and asked how I'm doing. Like, never in the history of my entire lifetime have I ever been called by a family member and said, "Oh my God, I didn't know. I'm really sorry. Can we talk about it?" Never, not one time. Never, not one family member, non-Indigenous family member ever. And in fact, my Indigenous family, it's a slow process of kind of trying to talk about it. So I learn as I learn what happened in my family, and that's just the way it is. But yeah, apparently the Queen's death triggered some of my family to be talking about how wrong I am behind my back, but not to pick up the phone and talk to me as per usual. And I know I watched my mother be demonized by my own family, non-Indigenous family, as someone who was crazy, as someone who, is she doing okay? Always questioning her mental health for, speaking out against the violence that she regularly received, which is a really important conversation to have, considering that right now I'm thinking of the English family. Once again, they have started with ceremony in Bagani and started walking towards Calgary for the October 4th Sisters in Spirit Vigil. And, it's a real reminder to non-Indigenous that violence is an everyday occurrence. We had September 30th to talk about Indian residential school survivors and those who didn't make it home yet. People don't see that the system that built all of that is still in place and continues harm every single day here. So on May 5th, when one of me and the family members were on the bus and Ctrain, we had an incident, and I can't remember if I even talked about it on the show, but sure enough, had an incident on the 30th. And this one was a little harder because my daughter was there, and we were dressed in our beautiful ribbon skirts that was made by a local friend here named Kathy Bear. Beautiful rainbow ones. You've probably seen them at Pride. These were the ones we wore again because while we did have orange shirts, I told my daughter, you don't have to wear an orange shirt if you're wearing your regalia, for God's sakes, because like, you're Indigenous, that's enough. So, but on the Ctrain, zero people were wearing orange shirts. Like, for Calgary, this was not a thing. My husband went to work and he was wearing one, and one other person purposely wore an orange hoodie for the gravity of the day. But the good news was his boss put out an email that had an incredible list of resources of what that day was, etc. Yes, they worked it. It's in Alberta, and I wanted to bring that up for two reasons. We were going to talk a little bit about the Queen. I don't like to give that much airtime because I don't have much respect for the monarchy. But, everybody had a day off the day that she was buried, the state funeral. And lots of people took that time off. As many of you know, I'm embedded in colonial politics, and all the pro Queen posts and statuses and pictures got so many likes and broken hearts and solidarity. But I shared many, many articles. I was on TV talking about, that this is our oppressor who's never lived up to the treaties. And I tell you, those same folks did not like and share my information. And even if it didn't come from me, like, that's part of the reason why I share a lot of the other Indigenous voices, is because I know, one, your algorithms are set to ignore women and women of color always. Like, that's just standard, and especially Indigenous people. And if you Google that, you will see lots of evidence to support that. But I share other people's opinions and such because, one, they usually say it a billion times better than I do, but they also, it shows different perspectives of the same situation from Indigenous voices. So anyway, by no means was I alone in sharing my disdain. And I actually lost a friend, an Indigenous friend, because, you know, she didn't think it was appropriate for me to talk about war cries. And I was like, okay. But I mean, we all have different teachings, and normally I would be okay with it. But for non-Indigenous people, you have to understand that our trauma is deep. Our trauma is not resolved. And it is easier for us to attack each other than it is the system. And it's really upsetting because they don't see it as that. They see it as this racist trope of all those natives are still fighting with each other. That's not what it is. It's that we are triggered by this system that you imposed. We have no recourse and we have no accountability. So it's easier to attack each other. And that's why if you are a listener, you have heard me speak many times about internalized racism. And that's what that is. And I highly suspect a lot of folks have never actually looked into it, read more into it, which is disappointing, because then I'm fighting not just the colonial system, white people's ignorance, settlers' ignorance, but then my own people. So needless to say, the Queen's death, September 30th, it always brings up pain, trauma, and a loss of friends and family. And that has always been my experience because of racism. And that is the root of this issue, is racism. So anyway, as you are listening to me across Canada, by the way, Ontario, you slightly are ahead of Alberta now for my listeners, not by much, but by some. October 4th is Sisters in Spirit Vigils. They're all across Canada. So if you are listening in Grand Prairie, I know you have one. If you're in Yellowknife, I know you have one. If you're in Ontario, I know there's a Sisters in Spirit Vigil. And you would be shocked at how many folks were still messaging me, Michelle, where can I purchase orange shirts? And there are a lot of times I am a smartass and just reply back, oh, is your Google broken? Because I mean, it's not like the resources aren't there. And it's not, you just want, you know, that lowly Indigenous woman that you're already oppressing. You just want her to do your work for you for free because you're a fucking asshole. So if you're one of those people who sent me that message, know that I am thinking that, because it is absolutely unacceptable for you to keep expecting Indigenous people who have lost their land, lost their language, lost their culture, don't get jobs solely based off of racism, and you just expect them to do your labor for them. So just fuck off with that. Just do that work. And I'm purposely using the F-bomb because for those settlers who think that you have to say it nice enough, trust me, we've been saying it nice enough. Your attempt at tone policing us is not helping. You're putting more effort into tone policing somebody than fighting racism. And that's a poor reflection of you, not on us for using foul language. So I can't emphasize that enough to my new folks who are listening. You are going to hear swearing throughout this because that's the proper use of the term after you forced us to learn your damn language of English. So, you know, you're either here to learn about Indigenous issues and racism or you're not. And don't pretend you're my ally. In fact, there are a lot of folks who think they're my ally, and it's really clear to me they don't know the basics because I put this up on every single podcast. So I know you're not listening. And the folks that do listen, I want to acknowledge you too in a good way, because I'm almost a year up to when we lost our job in Lethbridge. And let me tell you, it was a lot of my friends and family that stepped up and sent us, whether it was $5 or a couple $100 to help us with moving costs and moving back. And I will be forever grateful for that. I have met a few of you in real life, and I do want to address a little bit about, I don't know if fame is the right word, but Oh, Trevor Noah said it so perfectly. I encourage you to read or watch this little video of him talking about his grandma. And his grandma was asked the question, "What do you think of your famous grandson?" And he said, the thing is about that is that there's something about North America having the way they are about fame. And he said that in South America, it's not like that. Or South America, I apologize, South America and South Africa. In South Africa, that's where he's from. Uh, he said that fame is not a currency that it is here. And I've never heard it so eloquently said before, because while some of you will say really kind things to me, especially in real life, and say that you're fangirling me, I want you to know I am as imperfect as you in every way. There's no question. And fame isn't the currency it used to be for me anymore, because now I understand the problems with that and how that's a part of a colonial narrative. And so I wanted to address that. And I mean, but that said, I don't know how to always talk about that, because like there are a lot of people I really love and highly regard, like Wilton Littlechild, Murray Sinclair, Cindy Blackstock. You know, there are some folks that I love to pieces. And then there's famous people that I actually know and like. Like I do know Justin Trudeau and his wife, and they don't know me. Like they probably don't even know my daughter's name or my husband's name, but I know them, they know me, and I have no influence whatsoever with them. And they, of course, have every influence with me because they are the prime minister and the prime minister's wife. But that doesn't mean if push came to shove, I wouldn't say what I needed to say if I had the opportunity to say it. And the Liberals know that. And there are a lot of times I am excluded for that reason. So I know some of you think I have some kind of power or control, but I actually don't. And when you judge me, when you say that I do, and I don't, like you don't understand how party structures work and how that can't be true. So for example, somebody actually accused me of when I post something on my social media of using that as government outreach. And it's like, no, I actually found that such a insult. And I obviously that was the purpose of saying it, but I just wanted to make it crystal clear on this podcast. Like at no point have the Liberal Party ever taken anything I've said and used it in any capacity in their platforms or policies that are meaningful. Like, so for example, one of the proudest Liberal moments I ever had was, I think I want to say 2013, 14, when we were developing policy, and we said we have to have a national inquiry. And I didn't develop that policy. Another Liberal did, and you know I have a deep respect for her always for that. And when it passed, I videotaped it. It was a really proud moment. And for those who don't know how policy works, so you only get a couple. Like that's it. It doesn't matter if there's 400 problems in the country. You only get your three. You can only deal with three of them. And that's just the way policy works, and it sucks. And that's why at the beginning of every podcast, you'll hear me say, you know, I go to these things and I vote on incomplete policies because that's how it actually works. So I hope that explains a bit about that. And, you know, I wish this person listened to my podcast. I could tell by some of the other things they said that they have never listened and will never, and they will probably won't hear this, but it's just, I wanted to address it because I think it's important that people understand Indigenous women do not have clout in this country. We don't have influence unless it's, you know, written in a book, said by a doctorate, and even then, it's still downplayed in this country as relevant, because as Indigenous women, and most women, even white settler women, will agree that if your opinion is not from a male, it is lesser than. So, you know, this is just a constant thing that we face as Indigenous people. So my daughter and I were all dressed up and asked to speak for an event. And, again, we're not rich. We don't have influence or power or money. So we took the Ctrain to the event again. And sure enough, there was a woman who took it upon herself to try to, talk to the people around her about this sleeping person on this Ctrain. And when she went to take a photo of him, I immediately jumped in front and said, "It's not okay for you to take photos. Do you know what today is?" And she got so angry. She's like, "Yes." And she said, "Look at my face." And she was a brown woman, and she went out of her way to try to say that she understands when clearly she doesn't. So I just turned my back to her and tried to protect this person's, integrity and dignity the best that I could. And then she got mad and yelled, "Wow, don't touch me." And I said, "I have witnesses all around here telling, like, that can say I never touched you." And she was mad. She's like, "I'm going to call the police." I'm like, "Do it." And I just challenged her, "Call the cops then, just do it." And she didn't, of course, but she got up all in a huff and a puff and went to the other side after yelling at me that I need to clean my kind up. And I need to, you know, whatever she freaking said, something stupid. So she says this, and on the other side of the Ctrain's trying to take video of me. And I've been excited for that to go viral, hoping it would go viral because I sure didn't get it on video. I did get a picture of her eventually, but I don't have a video of the entire incident. Um, so that happened, and somebody asked me how my September 30th went, and I described the situation and immediately was dismissed by this person who asked me the question and said, "But you can't think that all of us are like that, right?" So then I had to stop her and say, "Look, you don't know what it's like to have to go through a hate crime, a racial attack. And I have to do it every single time I'm on public transit wearing anything Indigenous identifying. Because there's always a question when I don't, like, what is she?" But then as soon as I'm wearing something Indigenous, then it's that, oh, she's just another fucking native. And nobody makes eye contact with you, smiles to you, engages with you, talks to you, nothing. Unless you don't look Indigenous and you're certainly not proud of who you are. So that's just my everyday on the Ctrain. And I said to this woman that tried to downplay this that, until folks start stepping up, because the entire Ctrain was filled. Nobody was wearing an orange shirt. There was a Black woman who eventually said something, but honestly, I know I've read enough about racism. I mean, honestly, she was just protecting herself too. So I kind of backed off a bit about, clapping back and just let it be, because I obviously didn't want to endanger anybody else. And but I also wanted to show my daughter to stand up for herself, because it's not okay that Canadians continue to do this to us. Even some people will wear an orange shirt but not step in a situation like that at all. And I'm glad it happened to me, not my daughter or other people, because I will clap back and stand up for myself, but a lot of people won't. So the expectation from this woman who stopped me to ask me about what I thought of the day was for me to be like, "Oh my God, Canada's doing so great on reconciliation." But of course, that's not what I said. And she was disappointed I basically wouldn't compliment Canada for trying to do more. So, it's back to that, there's a racist trope I've heard my entire life, and it's, you can't make natives happy. They'll never be happy. And it's not that, folks. It's, you will never put yourself in a position of empathy, compassion, vulnerability, and actual education to learn why this hurts so much. And that's what happened. Now, the entire week, I had some really good teaching situations. I had some really crappy ones too. Like, I actually taught 2 classes I didn't think were going to happen because of the way the management had treated me. And the management had made me go through all of this rigmarole for like setting this up. And they were rude to me the entire time. They made me fill out all these vendor sheets. I had to give them my banking information, everything. And I said I never do it without payment upfront. And I was doing you all a favor by trying to make sure we arranged this properly. And then sure enough, they paid me the check for the first bit of consultation that they were rude to me. I do the teachings anyway. No one was more shocked than I was. They couldn't even send me a BCC saying, hey, we're sending this out to the entire company to be here at this time to watch you. So I didn't even have confirmation they wanted me, because they made it very clear I was just a stupid fucking vendor to them. And they were going to look at other options. So they never got back to me to tell me, oh, we actually didn't look into other options. And yes, we'd like to have you. So anyway, taught the 2 classes. And, I kind of got asked the same questions about reconciliation and such. And so I wanted to answer them on my podcast too, and just say to people that, until Canada really understands the truth, we cannot have reconciliation. Now, my podcast listeners, who I appreciate, I know you hear that all the time, but I'm not joking. This is still brand new to people. A lot of people don't have orange shirts, don't know where to buy them. I mean, they're at Walmart, London Drugs. If anybody took the time to Google Indigenous, create clothing lines local, they would find lots of options, but they just don't even bother. So for a lot of folks, like, we're still at the basics. A lot of people told me repeatedly, I didn't know I was a treaty partner. That was something new I learned from you. So literally, I went to these sessions to talk about so many things, and that was the one thing they learned, was that they are treaty partners. So I'm telling you all this on podcasts in hopes that you remind other people that. And it's sad this is where we're still at. We're not going to have reconciliation with this is the standard where, all Indigenous people are going to be treated poorly on public transit. That we're going to be questioned about, how we should say things, no swearing. Like, come on, guys. Like, either you're serious about doing the work of anti-racism or you're not. And when you tone police, you're not. If you don't know what tone policing is, please Google it. And please put your effort towards fighting racism, not tone policing people for swearing. So, that I want to help people, but at the same time, I block people easily when it comes to these things. And I had a really funny week actually with TikTok. So speaking of performative activism, what is not funny is what's happening in Iran. And it's been that way as long as I can remember. I was born in 1977, and I know what happened with the Western involvement in the 1970s and 1980s. And I grew up watching Oliver North at the Iran-Contra affair. Now, I forget sometimes that my family's a little more out there, and we watch the news religiously. And my dad watched all the World War I and II shows religiously. And, so maybe the rest of you don't remember, but I sure remember all of that. And the biggest thing I learned from that is that the West is the one that is causing all the problems in the globe. And I've known that forever. And when 9/11 happened, I thought either it was revenge for what had happened, for what we have done, or it was a false flag. And that's my understanding of geopolitics. So anyway, on TikTok, a bunch of young TikTokers thought it would be a great idea for everyone in the Western world to cut their hair. And I mean, this is completely inappropriate to be asking any Indigenous person to cut their hair at all after our history, let alone for something so performative. And frankly, something that we as the West have a role of accountability for creating that has never been properly accounted for. But if you listen to this podcast, you know that I talk about the lack of accountability for everything. But this is back to UNDRIP and the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. The West does not care about Indigenous people, whether they're in Iran or in Calgary. They care about making their freaking money. So that's what happened in Iran as well. And that's Western intervention creating all of these problems, creating a conservative Muslim fascist ruler so that Canada would have somebody to fight with. And of course, you know, the ironic part about it is that these new young activists who never read the news or pay attention to what our politicians are saying or doing, literally Justin Trudeau was one of the first people to come out and say, "Oh my God, I condemn what's going on in Iran, and I absolutely am so sad, and we stand in solidarity with Indigenous or with Iranian women." Of course, he said that. He has to say that. He's the prime minister. So it's not like there wasn't a lack of education of what was going on there. We know that's what's going on there. I've known that my entire life. I know they do public hangings. I know they have police that come in and beat the crap out of each other. And I think that's what they do here. But a lot of people disagreed with me on TikTok, but I don't also really got the impression they didn't know anything about Indigenous issues. They don't know anything about Canada. They don't know anything about our surveillance and us disproportionately being jailed and dying in their systems, whether it's healthcare, all of it, right? They have no idea. And they really clearly didn't know about the politics that geopolitics that had the geopolitical climate that led to this as well, like no concept of it. So it was, you know, it's hard because you want to have a conversation with them, but they're not interested in that. All they're interested in is tone policing an Indigenous woman because they know they can and have for years and will get away with it. But at the end of the day, I will say there still were some Indigenous women that I saw cut their hair for Iran, which is actually really like heartbreaking to know the gravity of what our hair means to us and still have some do it. But you know, and I respect Indigenous women who chose to do that, but I did want to call it out as performative activism. And there were I seen videos of brown women, black women basically saying the same thing, and that's, you know, it just sucks because there's a lack of education of what's the situation in Iran, but also locally, and that's why I have the podcast, obviously, to talk about it. And I don't mind. I actually thought it was funny, especially reading some of their stupidity about how they think, you know, there should be solidarity. And I'm like, you fuckers can't even show up for Reconciliation Day, you know, Sisters in Spirit Day, promote a single Indigenous person that you know. And in fact, the person who originally attacked me, holy shit, she freaking just lost it. And she was making up multiple accounts and coming at me. And I was just kind of, I wouldn't respond. Obviously, you don't respond to somebody who's so triggered, but the amount of effort that she was putting into trying to tell me she was an ally when clearly she should just be focused on the issue at hand. Like, it just showed if she put half of that energy into learning about Indigenous issues, how much further could we be as a country? So that was kind of funny to me. Yeah, so folks who don't know, I just block people. I mean, if they would have had something of substance to say, maybe, but they obviously needed like a 101 on Iran and Western intervention, first and foremost. Second of all, like, if they did, they would not be asking for more Western in intervention, because that's the last thing you would want. So that's my take, but I seen like every mainstream media was talking about it. So to me, it was actually really mainstream. There's no secret about it. And anyone who doesn't know, Iran does public hangings. Like, I don't know what to tell you. That says more about your education system than anything. And I know they're not going to learn it there. I just live in a house that watched the news, and of course now all I do is watch the news and talk about it with my family. So kind of feel bad for my daughter. Anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to I wanted to do a quick one because I hadn't got a chance to really discuss any of that. I hope that there was something that you learned. I did learn a lot of people, you know, were really surprised to find out how hard it is for Indigenous women to get Indian status. And I think that just is the basis of not understanding violence against women, the Indian Act, and Indigenous issues, because um, I always show my Indian Act and Post status card at every one of my teachings. And I tell them we've been going through this process now for years with my daughter. S3 allows her to have her status, but they took all our documents, sent them back, and said, oh, we need to see those documents, the ones that we sent back. So now I got to go around the house and find those documents and send them back. And of course, I don't have time to be running around for Indian Affairs. So I said very clearly, there's no accountability to Indian Affairs in the shit they pull. It is easier in this country for non-Indigenous people to get their passport as well as get their citizenship. And you hear the problems of both, but Indian Affairs is exactly the same, but there's no accountability whatsoever when it comes to these processes. So, folks who don't know what I'm talking about, and this is the biggest thing they're learning, that's the basis of everything. It means they're not reading about Indigenous issues. They're not, paying attention to the inquiry, all that stuff. So, yeah, and that was another conversation I had a lot with folks where I said, for about 6 months, and all of my podcast listeners know because you went through this journey with me. But when the 215 graves were rediscovered and it sent shockwaves throughout the country, Deconstructing Karen actually said it right: when there's shock by white people, that is a form of white supremacy. So in Canada, I would say that's a form of settler supremacy, because while the majority of people are white, it was shocking to everybody because they didn't know, which showed me they didn't read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the people who were hiring me for my teachings beforehand, I guess they just thought I made up the big gravestone that's at Fort Providence Indian Residential School. It's sitting there. It was there long before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Jack White Goose Flying, he was relocated so that Glenmore Circle could be a thing, and he's put in the Queen's Cemetery here, and that's why the city of Calgary named it after him. There, look at the TRC. I know people don't get it, and I can't put the dots closer together for folks. But if these were their big revelations, like, I just hope some of my podcast listeners during, Thanksgiving and such, like, can maybe guide some of your friends and family, because like I can't reply to every Jonathan K. and Barbara K. Indian residential school denial article that goes out there, but you can, or my listeners can. And the fact that you choose not to shows me that you still don't know how to be an ally. And you are either, one, okay with Indigenous being treated that poorly, or two, you're just not there. And I don't know what it's going to take. So if you are a listener and you see racism on the Ctrain station, you see Jonathan K. and Barbara K. and their shitty articles, and you think it's okay to not reply to them and not tell people why that's wrong, like, I'd love to understand why. And I'd love to understand why it is you're struggling so hard, because like I have to do this in front of my daughter and when I'm being personally attacked. So what is stopping you from doing something? Please, I'd love to know. So next Monday on October 10th is going to be Res Rules by Chief Clarence Louie. We're going to do chapters 7 and 8 of the National Inquiry. We won't be posting 5 and 6 because, and this happens a lot in my book club, I ask people, just let me know if you need me to pause you. And then they don't. And then afterwards they're like, oh, I don't want that. Can you cut out my part? I could, but here's the thing. then you're asking me to do more labor. So quite frankly, I just kind of feel like, if you were meant to be at my book club, you were. If you're not, you're not. So if you're a listener, you've been meaning to hit my book club, I'd love to have you listen to some of the recordings. Like Jesse Wente was so great and let us record them, and it's up there, but not every book clubber will. And that's why some of the TRC or the National Inquiry isn't there, because people shared really personal things and in retrospect don't want them aired. And I respect that enough to not air it, but that means that, I can't share any of it sometimes. So if you are interested about learning about the inquiry, just at the minimum, read it. You don't always have to give your opinion. If you're wanting to be on the podcast, whatever. But just read it, because if people are surprised to hear my daughter doesn't have her status because of Indian affairs, that shows me you haven't read it. Anyway, standoff December 12th with Bruce McIver, and I haven't technically set up anything for January yet, but I have a bit of a list of things I'd like to do. So I'm hoping people will come finish up the National Inquiry with me and such. And another common question I get about book club is, oh, do you have to be a member in order to come? It's like, no, you just come. Like, if you can come, you come. If you can't, you can't. It's not a membership only. You have to pay $20 to get in. It's not like that. I've tried to make an open to the public book club so that people can learn about Indigenous issues. And lots of people who listen to my podcast have told me they've learned so much from me, which is great. And some of you donate, some of you don't. But if I'm still getting told, oh my God, I didn't know I was a treaty partner, then it's not getting out there. It's not getting out to the people that need to know it. So I need your help so that I don't have to talk to my racist uncle. I need you to talk to my racist uncle out in real life. I need, Brian Jean to get set aside from somebody other than his poor Indigenous nieces and nephews and be told, hey, did you know this happens and this is why? But it's not getting out there, folks. So I just really encourage you to be a little stronger with your advocacy. Shout out to the Reconciliation Action Group for doing the work of putting out press releases saying, hey, we are not cool with this lack of action on Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to actions, the calls to justice. So I know the Alberta government has a big announcement on October 4th, which I think is awful because, that is the day of mourning. It should be done not on that day, but a different day. But, I'm sure it caught you off guard there, Alberta government. So you're like, oh boy, we better make an announcement on that day. It better be good. It better be funding your 113 pathways to justice that you're very proud of. Anyway, I'm really proud that this podcast has given solutions and included cultural safety, cultural first aid in all of them. So if you go to heretohelp.bc.ca, there's a whole bunch of content about Indigenous people and what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it, by authors Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fridkin. Those are cultural action tools. I've said in my podcast, you can support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work. Indigenous understanding and treaty partnership. I'm just lucky enough to highlight and repeat them here. RacialEquityTools.org has tons of resource files. By Donna Bevins, there's one called Internalized Racism. So if you are a person of color, like the young brown Iranian woman who took it upon herself to spend hours attacking an Indigenous woman that she thinks she's an ally to, you might want to learn about internalized racism. Lateral violence in general. It's interesting. I've been seeing a lot of conversation about what lateral violence is and isn't. So again, their resources are out there. And I am always saddened when I see my own people fighting with themselves over some of these things too, because, what's the point? CBC just came out with a really great documentary called Pretend to Indians. I haven't watched it yet, but it's basically white people who try to pretend to be Native in order to access money and grants. So just for the record, not only can you see my Indian Act imposed status card anytime, anywhere. But you can also know that this is an independent podcast that has never gotten any funding from the government in any capacity. So I think that alone should be the proof that I must be pretty native. At least I'm telling myself jokes. I got to get off of here. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. So that's afsc.org. And there's lots you can do so that I'm not the only person who's forced to, stand between some racist jerk trying to take pictures of folks on the Ctrain that are sleeping. If you see or experience racism, you can report them at acttoendracism.ca and text at 587-507-3838. And I haven't sent mine because I wasn't even sure if they would consider it racism. I recently checked them out, and currently they brought in a bunch of Easterners to talk about racism rather than talking to local Treaty 7 leaders. Like, there are so many here. So I was really disappointed with that. So I might actually quit promoting acttoendracism.ca because I'm not sure how much they are really inclusive of Indigenous people. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas and reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. I'm going to say this real quick. I've had a lot of conservatives try to say to me that, well, Justin Trudeau's not doing enough on reconciliation. And I say to them, but your conservative base voted against the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. And then they move the goalpost and they say, oh, I wasn't talking about the conservatives. And I'm like, yeah, but you can't have Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party be effective at reconciliation with absolutely nobody holding them to account, and especially the official opposition. And when the official opposition puts out their policies and their platform for any upcoming election, it is not based on reconciliation and equality. If any political party in this country was serious about reconciliation, first of all, there would be a dramatic injection of investment to make up for the decades and decades and decades of inequities. And then once we had structures and infrastructure set up like other Canadians, and then we got dollar to dollar funding, then at least we'd be on equal ground. But we're not there. And that would probably still be under Canadian governance instead of Indigenous governance. So don't pretend to me that Justin Trudeau is not doing enough for Indigenous when the average Joe Canadian has no concept of what it is that needs to be done. That doesn't mean not holding Justin Trudeau to account. Absolutely, hold him to account. Hold the Liberal Party to account. But that doesn't mean that there's much for alternatives right now. And when people bring up the NDP, it's funny how they frame it. I can always tell when they're conservatives, they're like, well, look what the NDP has done to BC. And I'm like, well, actually, if you look at the provincial Liberals that they had there and how much they hurt their economy, and then you've seen the switch in economy after the NDP were put in, that would actually be a reason to elect the NDP, wouldn't it? And then they, get all flustered and change the subject. So, and I tell you this because I go door to door. I talk to people every day because I have a candidate I absolutely want elected. And so I don't know. And that's the other thing. Like, people talk about holding Justin Trudeau to account, but most people don't even understand the orders of government and the political system we have, let alone being involved in it, let alone, how many people of privilege regularly say to me, oh my God, I'd be so afraid to door knock because, the atmosphere that's out there right now. And I regularly remind people, I have conversations every day with people. I do it on purpose, and I don't get attacked. I'll, would person to person, people are normal. It's on Twitter, it's on social media that people are just right off their rockers on how to engage and talk about politics. So anyway, I really encourage people to actually get involved instead of just complain. Like, there's so much work to do at so many different levels. And even for me, I've been working on saying no more because I can't do it all. and I'm okay with that. For 10 years, I've had no proxy to take over for the IPC. So anyway, there's an election coming up within our own party structure. So if you were on my personal Facebook page, which I'm trying to limit less and less to people, and you're a liberal, I'd love for you to sign my papers. I need to check that status later today. I'll try to. Anyway, I'm trying to get around to all of that. Anyway, start talking about politics again. Holy, how did I get off link here? So listen to politicians and their policies and their platforms. If they don't recognize marginalized in their budget with gender equity plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, drug consumption sites, gay straight alliances, a lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disability, know that your vote to that party directly impacts marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to actions, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform. That, you see, this is the thing. I'm naming all of these resources. You know how many people told me, oh, they didn't know that there were so many resources available. So I don't know, folks, who you're retweeting and who you're sharing to, but they ain't seeing your posts when I talk about these reports that you can obviously share this on. So anyway, provincially in Alberta, government under Kenny created 113 pathways to justice, which they're going to have some big announcement for on October 4th. So if you're all voting blue, you better be holding your blue MLAs to account on it. Municipally, we have the White Goose Flying Report. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in society, media, education, and health institutions, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, and sexism, they literally have zero business running. This should be understood by all parties, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, etc. A great article I said out loud in episode 62 is Truth Before Truth. How non-Indigenous Canadians become allies. Literally, this is public. You can Google how to be an ally to Indigenous people, and there are multiple articles now. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything I talked about today and want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It's toll-free, open 24 hours a day. They also have a website, hopeforwellness.ca, that has a little text option on there. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. If you are non-Indigenous, you can call distress center lines in your area, usually a functioning 211, or 833-456-4566. The 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta is ssisa.ca. If you see or experience racism, report it at ACT to End Racism or text at 587-507-3838. Following are 2S LGBTQ+ crisis supports, which are available in most areas across Canada. So you can go to lifevoice.ca and find tons. Trans Lifeline is 877-330-3633. Sorry, forget that. 877-330-6366. The Trevor Project, thank you for these resources. For LGBTQ2+ youth, 866-844-7386. Last episode was so great. We talked a lot about the drug poisoning crisis that we're facing. And if you know somebody who is using substances, and most importantly, do not use alone. If you are using alone, you can use the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS. Or you can also get the Brave and Doors app. Both of them will help you there. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. It is why I started a podcast to speak freely without interruption, tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinion, but sure want to tell us theirs by people who know nothing about Indigenous peoples. our colonialism, the constant surveillance of our people, vigils, protests, rights. I and many others share this info on microaggressions daily, so it's unacceptable to say them anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeeping, surviving off the status quo, folks who are in their trauma. There's so many resources being depleted every single day. So me getting Karen asking me to get her an orange shirt is like disgusting. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me, Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC, and many others. Masicho to my ancestors, my granny, and my mom of what strength looks like through your example. I want to say thank you to my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and stepping up and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I am a second generation proud Calgarian. Thank you to Big Buffalo Rockman for producing and editing the show, on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and support down my journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of sexism and racism. And to our child, Thunderpipe Necklace Woman, who spoke really, really bravely, by the way, at the TRC event. Thank you so much to the community for having us out. We are blessed to learn from you daily. We are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening and watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe, and go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And I want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin responded, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you all for listening and for continuing to support this podcast.